I think we are recording. Can we, Ms. Williams, can you please start us off with a roll call? Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Poole.
Good morning, Commissioners. District 1. District 2.
Present.
District 4. District 5. District 6.
Present.
District 8. District 9.
District 9 is present.
District 10.
Present.
District 12.
Present.
District 13.
Present.
District 14. District 15.
I'm here.
Thank you very much. We do have a quorum, and just for the record, District 5 is here. Welcome, gentlemen, this morning. This is the briefing of the Dallas City Planning Commission. Today is August 4th, 2022, 10:10 a.m. Just a couple of quick announcements, Commissioners. We will be beginning from the top of the docket on the briefing with the one miscellaneous item. And then I think we're going to do Mr. Aguilera's cases first, which I think, I'm looking through the docket here, I think many cases are getting held, so I think he may just be briefing us on just one of his cases. He's got another commitment. And then just looking forward, we will be briefing the West Oak Cliff Area Plan today. We will be taking public input at the hearing, and I suspect we do have planned, in fact, that the item will come back on the 18th along with a van tour. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. So pack light next time, 2 weeks from today. With that, Commissioners, we do have a lot of cases that are being held. We'll go through those one at a time, and we'll begin with Ms. Seaton. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Not sure about the presentation. I have it up over here, Jason. I am sharing, Jason, so I'm not sure what's the delay. So sharing. There it goes.
You just have to share the right thing.
Thank you, Jason. This case has been briefed before. Did you want me to rebrief it?
If you could just maybe, if there are any changes, or maybe just a brief overview.
Okay. The only, like I said, one of the commissioners had a question regarding the Article 10, regarding the tree, because they're doing a tree mitigation on this case. And according to Philip, which I'm not sure if he's online, I don't see him. But he did send an email regarding the landscape regulations for this property. In 1994, this property was built, and in 2006, the revisions were applied. And in 2005, the CPC approved the landscaping conditions for the renovations, and it did not go beyond the scope of the front of the building. So this minor amendment does not trigger a full code, a full amendment to the new code, and therefore the recommendation that he gives is, since it's on a minimal scale to the changes, he agrees that we should just really keep what the CPC approved before.
May I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Thank you. Ms. Seaton, to confirm, when the existing structure was built, it was under the 1986 Article 10 landscaping plan, is that correct? I believe it's in that same email from Mr. Irwin.
2018, yes.
Yes, thank you. And so there was a minor amendment in 2005, but again, it did not trigger full compliance with our current Article 10, and it is in compliance with the originally required landscaping.
Correct.
Provisions, I should say. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Seaton. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hampton. Commissioners, any other questions on this item? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Eaton. Commissioners, let's skip over to Mr. Aguilera's cases. Case number 2, I believe is going to be, it's been withdrawn. Number 3 is going to be held under advisement to August 18th. Number 4, going to be held under advisement to September 15th. That takes us to case number 6.
Chair Shadid,
Yes.
September 1st.
I'm sorry?
Case 4, September 1st.
September 1st. Thank you very much. This case number 4, S212224, going to be held under advisement to September 1st. Mr. Aguilera, good morning. That takes us to case number 6.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the City Plan Commission. Oscar Aguilera with Current Planning. Thank you so very much to let me go first. Item 6, which is application Z201-333. It has previously been briefed. The case is for an application for special use permit for a commercial amusement outside use property zone MU1 mixed use district, and the purpose of the request is to allow for the operation of a restaurant with an outdoor pickleball. The change that was done is we request the applicant from this site plan to remove the landscape, and he follow our advice, and he's now only providing the site plan without any landscape on it, and the landscape will be addressed at permitting, and he will comply with Article 10, and then staff is recommending for approval for a 3-year period, subject to the site plan and conditions. Any questions?
I believe there will be some questions. Commissioner Young?
Yes, first of all, the staff, the agenda says approval for a 2-year period, so is it 3 now?
It's 2 year, sir. My apologies.
2 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Secondly, the docket said a parking demand was requested by the senior engineer, but the applicant is not seeking a reduction in the required parking as compared to the code recommended ratios. That's on 6.2. Then on 6.4, there is a revision to the restaurant parking as an accessory use from 1 to 100 to 1 to 200. So that is a change to the code parking, is that right?
Not exactly, Commissioner Young, the restaurant is allowed by right. The only focus on this request is for the outside requirement, but I will let David answer that question.
Okay.
David, may you help me out with this question, please?
If Mr. Navarez is available now, that's fine. If not, I can ask the question at the hearing.
Okay. I don't see him on my screen, but I don't have the full screen. I'm not sure if he's online. Is he? Okay, he is online. No, he's not online? Okay, he is not online, so Commissioner Young will take up that question at the hearing, sir.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner Stannard, please.
I just want to clarify something. Did I hear it just said that the restaurant is an accessory use? Isn't the restaurant the main use?
So the SUP for this application is not related to the restaurant because the restaurant is allowed by right.
Oh,
So
okay.
Yeah, so the SUP is only for the outside.
Pickleball.
Yeah, pickleball.
Okay, I got you. So it makes the restaurant an accessory to the SUP because it's by right. I got you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
Mr. Aguilera, have the hours of operation been reduced since we first saw this case? Because I was thinking the original conditions had the hours of operation for the ball courts going until midnight, and what I see now is 10 p.m.
Correct. This was an amendment by upper management from last approval to this approval. So I make those amendments per management or upper management request.
And something was also added about prohibiting outdoor speakers.
Speakers, correct.
And are those the two changes that were made from the original submission on the SUP conditions?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Young.
Mr. Chair, I've answered my own question. 1 per 200 for accessory restaurant use is code. And of course, this is an SUP, so we couldn't vary from the code anyway. So no need for Mr. Navarez at 1:30 for this case, for my question.
Thank you, sir.
I do have a
Commissioner
question.
Carpenter, please.
I don't know if it's for Mr. Aguilera or for perhaps Ms. May. How is it that this restaurant use is considered to be an accessory use? Wouldn't it be an additional main use? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Never mind, I've gotten the answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
The answers kind of spread around at the horseshoe. Commissioner Stannard, please.
Okay, quick question that I just want to clarify for the future, because I read in it that they initially are going to put the 4 pickleball courts, and then they have space to add them. Does this SUP automatically include the adding of the pickleball courts?
Okay, so if you see the site plan, there is a future pickle court balls, but the future one will not be approved with this SUP. If they decide to add that additional pickle court balls, they will have to come back to CPC and then modify their amendment to include it with so that permitting can approve their request.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. So this doesn't
Yes.
include the future add-on. Thank you, Mr. Aguilera.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Aguilera.
Thank you so very much.
The next case is going to be held under advisement, commissioners. That's number 7 of Mr. Aguilera to August 18th. No, it's not. Okay, it's going to be heard today. Okay, we're ready, Mr. Aguilera. The one that's staff recommendation? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong name. My apologies. It is Jennifer, you're right. Commissioner, so we'll go back to the top of the agenda. Case number 1, Z212217, is going to be held under advisement to September 1st. Again, number 2 has been withdrawn. Number 3 will be held under advisement to August 18th. Number 4, held under advisement September 1st. Number 5, held under advisement to August 18th. Number 6, we just heard, takes us to number 7. Ms. Aguirre. Number 5, held under advisement to August 18th. 2 weeks from today. Good morning.
Good morning. I apologize, but I was under the impression that this was being held. Is there?
No, they submitted the deed restrictions. And the deed restrictions, were they not sent out yet last night?
I did see something
They were
going
sent out.
around.
They were sent out last night. So with the deed restrictions, the applicant was asking that the case be moved forward.
So, I'm sorry, I'm getting.
No,
a
no,
weird
you're
echo
okay,
here
you're okay, you're okay.
That I'm trying to get rid of.
We can come back to this case if you'd like after we, I think we can do the West Oak Cliff Area Plan briefing and we can swing back to this one. That work?
I mean, okay, that's what we'll do. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Commissioners, that takes us to case number 8. Also going to be held under advisement to August 18th. And that takes us to the subdivision, August 18th. I think I'm going on vacation on August 18th.
I was going to say, are we going to be able to do all these cases on August 18th, plus take a bus tour? Should we bring a sleeping bag?
You should, yes.
thank
We're going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then breakfast again on the 18th. Commissioner subdivision docket, the consent agenda items, number 13 has come off consent. So it'll be 1 through 12, and then number 14 will be on the consent agenda item. Commissioner Blair will make the motion. Takes us to the certificate of appropriateness for signs. We need an update. No? Is there any update needed, Commissioner Hampton?
I believe Mr. Poole distributed some additional details from the applicant, but I don't believe there were any other questions unless the commission had others.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Jason Poole, Current Planning. There are 3 cases today. The first is application number 22051, 60030. It's an application for a certificate of appropriateness by Carlos Juarez of Royal Signs for a 97.8 square foot illuminated attached sign at 302 West Jefferson. This is on the north elevation. The site is located in the Jefferson Area Special Purpose District, also known as Plan Development District number 316. The zoning is Plan Development District 316, Subdistrict 1. The proposed sign is to be an update to the existing tenant sign originally installed in February of 2003. The proposed sign will face West Jefferson. All applicable code has been met. The applicant proposes to install a 97.8 square foot LED illuminated channel letter set on the north facade of the building. The sign is proposed to read Jack's Dollar Party Items and Event Decor. All sign elements are constructed entirely of metal, plastic, and LED lighting. This sign will have a layered effect utilizing 5-inch deep backlit channel letters, an 1/8-inch deep halo lit backplate, and a 6-inch deep wireway. Each channel letter is proposed to have a white plastic face with yellow, black, and red translucent vinyl graphics that will backlight the same color using white LED. All trim cap and returns are to be white. All letters will be mounted on a black metal backplate, and the backplate will halo light using white LED. The overall projection of the sign will not exceed 12 inches. The purpose of this district is to regulate both the construction of new signs and the alteration of existing signs with a view towards enhancing, preserving, and developing the unique character of this district. These sign regulations have been developed with the following objectives in mind. 1, to protect the historical and architectural character of this district from inappropriate signs in terms of number or clutter, style, color, and materials. Number 2, to ensure that significant architectural features in this district or of a building within this district are not obscured. Number 3, to promote the economic success of each business within this district and, in turn, the collective success of this district. Number 4, to ensure that the size and orientation of signs are geared towards the high number of pedestrians in this district. Number 5, to enhance the aesthetics of this district. And number 6, to promote safety, communications, efficiency, and landscape quality and preservation. Here's a general location for this sign. And the SPSD location in respect to the other SPSDs. Here's a detail. This is the overall SPSD, and you can see the bounds of that PD as well. Here's an aerial map. Again, it's on the north facade facing Jefferson. And some of the surrounding uses as well as the zoning map. To the north is office and a restaurant. To the west would be personal service and general merchandise, and to the east is a medical clinic. Here's the applicant provided location map. And here's the proposed sign on the elevation. And the sign detail. And the construction details. Here are the site photos. And this is the surrounding area. On the left is facing west on Jefferson, and on the right facing northeast on West Jefferson. You can see the Texas Theater back there. This on the left is facing east on West Jefferson and facing directly west on West Jefferson towards the location. Here are some of the just details of the building. And some of the surrounding signs within the district. Here we've got this optical clinic. You can see the Texas Theater. This Texas Optical there is the same type of construction. This is a little bit to the west. You can see an awning and some trim cap letters. Here's another view of that same building. The Justice Finance, again, very similar. Channel letters on a backplate. And next to the location here, you can see an awning in the barber shop, which is just some non-illuminated letters and some flat panels on the building. Here's the Texas Theater. It's exposed neon and a marquee sign below. And both staff and SSDAC recommend approval.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Stanner?
Yes, this is my only question, which is, how does this new sign proportionately compare to the 2003 sign? I mean, just basically.
It is basically the same size.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Because I couldn't tell that from the picture, so thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, just one point of clarification. I noted in your presentation that the purpose statement was to protect the architectural character. Is this sign concealing any distinctive architectural features on the building?
There are some strange little windows. I don't know if I would call them significant architectural features. You can see this barber shop here. They kind of use them to run their power through the building. But
Yes.
They are little windows. They go into the lease space. I think in this one it would be below that drop-down ceiling, so it's just kind of lighting maybe for the attic.
Or they may be vents, perhaps. And so, but this would not conceal it any further than the existing sign did. Is that
Correct.
correct? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. No? Any other questions on this item, Commissioners? Did I see your hand go up, Commissioner Popkin? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Poole.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
may I ask a question on these previous cases?
Of course.
This is on case 28 and 29 in Deep Ellum, and it relates to the sentence in your report that says, "It is the practice of building inspection to exclude first-floor tenants with dedicated storefronts on multi-story buildings from maximum area calculations." I searched through the code for justification for that practice and couldn't find it. The definition of a premise is a lot, so that would seem that under 1305C, the maximum effective area of all signs combined on a premise would mean on all signs combined on the lot. Can you point me to where the code permits that?
Business zoning regulations has something that kind of alludes to that when there is a multi-tenant building like that. Let me see if I can find that code. Can I get back with you on that?
You certainly can. And then my next question, how difficult would it be to determine what the total effective area would be if all the signs on the lot were included? Would it be over the 1,200 square foot threshold?
That would take some substantial research.
All right, well then, don't bother. Thank you.
Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, is it correct that in the Deep Ellum ordinance that doors and windows are excluded from the facade area calculation?
They're included in the facade area calculation. Like it's just a blanket around the
Okay,
facade.
I'll double check. I know there's a provision in there, so.
There is for painted applied signs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioners, on this item?
Do I need to brief this item?
Which item?
The next two.
These two have not been heard
Oh,
previously.
they have not been briefed before? Okay,
No.
please.
All right, the next item, and both of these next two are at the same site, is item number 2206-170028. This is sign A. It's an application for a certificate of appropriateness by Bobby Nichols of Chandler Signs for a 116.8 square foot illuminated attached sign on the west elevation. The site address is 2700 Commerce Street, Suite 1500. This is located on the west elevation. This is within the Deep Ellum Near East Side Sign District. The zoning is Planned Development District number 269, Tract A. This is the first of 2 applications for this site. This sign is to be located on the west elevation and is submitted as sign A. Sign B on the south elevation is of identical construction. All applicable code has been met. The purpose of this district is to promote signage that is compatible with the architectural character and design guidelines of the Deep Ellum Near East Side Planned Development District, while encouraging artistic, creative, and innovative signs which are reflective of themes that have grown and developed in the Deep Ellum area. The applicant proposes to install a 116.8 square foot set of LED illuminated channel letters against the facade facing Henry Street and bearing a logo naming and the name Worldwide Express. All sign elements are constructed entirely of metal, plastic, and LED lighting. Both the channel letters and logo will have white plastic faces with black returns and trim cap. The faces of each letter and logo are to be backlit using white LED. Both the logo and letters will mount to the facade utilizing a combination of flush mounting and wireways painted to match the brick. The overall projection is not to exceed 12 inches beyond the face of cast stone on the brick columns. And there is a slight correction there. The applicant did submit a revised mounting detail. So instead of mounting entirely flush, there's also stud mounted mounting included in that. So it will have a wireway, stud mounting, and part will be flush mounted. Here's the general location in relation to the city and the location of the SBSD in relation to the city. Here's the location of the SBSD in relation to the other SBSDs, and a general location of the site within the SBSD. Here's the aerial map and a zoning map, including the surrounding uses. Majority of the uses are restaurant, both to the north and east. There is a commercial amusement to the south, as well as an office use, and another restaurant to the southwest, as well as multifamily on the next 2 streets over off of Canton. That's the Adam Hatz building. Again, this is sign A. Here's the site map. Here is an elevation detail. It's approximately 70'6" off the ground to the bottom of the sign. Here's a photo rendering. These are the sign details. Again, a revision was submitted. There is a piece of cast stone that runs across that column, and this mounting detail accounts for that cast stone. Here's the cross section. You can see the cast stone piece here, as well as the raceway where you're seeing through the column, and the additional stud mounting with spacers there. The sign is designed to sit flush with that cast stone accent. Here are some wall details provided by the applicant. Here's that cast stone piece we're referring to. And some site photos. Here is the surrounding area. On the left, it's facing east on Commerce. On the right, facing west down Commerce. And this is facing north off Henry and facing south on Henry. You can see the Adam Hatz building back there in the back. This is a Google Street View from 345 facing north. You can see kind of the side elevation there and the south elevation, which will be where the next sign is. And on the right is facing east on 345, where this sign would be most visible from that expressway. Here's some of the signs around the district. the Punch Bowl Social, open face neon, some painted applied signs. Here's the Twisted Route down the street with some open face neon and painted applied and some channel letters. The Angry Dog, which went through the beginning of this year. Here's a district identification sign and the Adam Hatz sign. And a couple more. There's one of the few detached signs in Deep Ellum, the ruins. Here's some murals that are across the street. This is a building further down on Canton, a set of channel letters on a wireway. Same with the restaurant across the street. There's channel letters with a back or a wireway, a flag-mounted sign for dots. And I took a picture of these little cast stone accents that were just in the bottom of the building itself. These are some of the surrounding buildings that are over 65 feet above grade, just to show a comparison of those sign types. You've got the Case building. It has a metal face cabinet. This is the Epic here. It currently doesn't have any signs up there, but it would be a candidate for the requirement for signs above 65 feet. This building is the Indy. I believe it was formerly the Novel when it was first went through the committee, but it has potential for signs being mounted above 65 feet. We have the Grain Elevator, which is the only building in Deep Ellum that's able to have the wallscape, and this public storage building. Those signs went through, I believe, 2 years ago. Uh, 333 First. It went through earlier this year, I believe. We've got the Ambrose, also above 65 feet. Here is a building across the street from the Case building on Main. It would be a candidate for above 65 feet. And finally, the Crosby. And those are pretty much all the buildings I could see that would have eligibility for signs above 65 feet in Deep Ellum. And both staff and SSDAC recommend approval.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. Questions, Commissioners? Commissioner Stannard.
Do they already have a sign?
There is a park sign on this building for the parking lot.
Oh, okay. So is this an additional one or their first big one?
This is for the tenant, the West or the worldwide tenant. The park is for the parking garage, which I believe the bottom 6 floors of this building are parking, and the top of this building is office, whereas the very bottom floor is the mixed use for retail and restaurants.
I got you.
That was an obstacle with the Deep Ellum Code whenever it was rewritten. It didn't account a lot for these multi-use buildings like this, and that partly geared that interpretation along with the business rules interpretation as to why those bottom floors would be excluded from that calculation.
So this is just one sign, the tenant sign, like we see on buildings up there?
Correct.
There's not 2 or all around? Okay,
There are
thank you.
2 signs for this tenant. On this elevation, the west side, there's only one. The next sign will be on the south elevation, and it is the other sign, same tenant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hampton.
I will just ask one follow-up, Mr. Poole. Thank you for the very detailed presentation. This building is a new construction, is that correct?
That is correct. It was formerly a parking lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions?
I would add that all the buildings other than the grain elevator and maybe one other one, the 333 First, are all new buildings. The next sign, CA number 220-617-0029, also an application for a certificate of appropriateness by Bobby Nichols of Chandler Signs for 147.4 square feet of illuminated attached sign on the south elevation. Again, the site address is 2700 Commerce Street and Suite 1500. It is within the Deep Ellum Near East Side Sign District, Zone Plan Development District Number 269, Tract A. This is the second of 2 applications for this site. The sign is to be located on the south elevation and is submitted as Sign B. Sign A on the west elevation is of identical construction. This sign does meet all applicable code. Again, the purpose of this district and the applicant proposes to install a set of channel letters flush against the facade facing Clover Street, bearing a logo and the name Worldwide Express. All sign elements are constructed entirely of metal, plastic, and LED lighting. Both the channel letters and logo will have white plastic faces with black returns and trim cap. The faces of each letter and logo are to be backlit using white LED. Both the logos and letters will mount flush against the facade with an overall projection not to exceed 5 inches. Here's the general location and the SPSD location, the SPSD in relation to the other SPSDs, and a general within the SPSD. And the aerial map, again, this sign faces south towards Clover. The zoning map, again, this is sign B. The site map. Here's the mounting or the elevation detail showing the height of the building. This sign is a little over almost 200 feet to the bottom of the sign. Here's the elevation rendering and the sign details and the mounting detail. You can see this will mount flush against the metal panels on that building, and all wiring and electrical will be concealed. Here is an applicant provided wall detail. This was sent out later, showing the metal panels. And the site photo. Here are some of the surrounding area. This is facing north on Henry, and on the right is facing south on Henry. This is facing east on Clover. You can see the murals painted down Clover. And again, facing north on 345. This would be where that sign would be most visible, and east on 345 toward the other sign. Again, some signs surrounding the district and the surrounding sites and signs that are over 65 feet above grade. Again, staff and SSDAC recommend approval.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, I believe it was in your case report, this new sign is going to align with the edge of the window opening, is that correct?
Let me pull up that view. I believe that is the intent, yes.
And then I believe you had a follow-up confirmation that it's going to be centered within the metal panels at that parapet height. Is that correct?
Yes, centered vertically and horizontally in line with that window.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Poole. Commissioners, that takes us to the West Oak Cliff Area Plan, and Mr. Church is ready to go. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning. One moment while I get permission to share my screen.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to present more about the West Oak Cliff Area Plan. My name is Daniel Church, planner in the Planning and Urban Design Department, and I've been project managing this area plan for the last 2.5 years. So today I'm going to touch on some of the topics that came up in the conversation 2 weeks ago. I'm going to talk about how the area plan relates to other adopted citywide plans. I'm going to talk about the missing middle housing piece and some concerns about replatting. Can we turn off a microphone right here? Just
I think there is a speaker there that is live, and that's what you're hearing.
Test. Yeah, that's a lot better. Sorry about that. Third, we'll talk a little bit about engagement with commercial property owners, and we'll talk about support from local neighborhood associations and then next steps. So to start with how the area plan relates to other adopted citywide plans, area plans provide a vision for a specific geography within the city informed by community engagement. At the same time, we've got dozens of citywide plans related to a ton of different topics. As those are adopted city policy, area plans must align with adopted city policy. So it's really our role as staff is to synthesize what the community's vision is with what those adopted city policies and goals state to ensure that there's a plan that aligns with citywide objectives, but also can be supported by the local stakeholders. So here's just a list of some of the numerous citywide plans that we consulted and aligned the area plan with. I'm going to go through some of these and talk about just how they relate to each other. So Connect Dallas, which is the strategic mobility plan, that was adopted last year. It uses goals of safety, sustainability, equity, housing, economic vitality, and innovation to guide investments and policy decisions around transportation and mobility. The West Oak Cliff Area Plan provides a list of recommendations for street enhancements, traffic calming, other safety measures related to streets and transportation that which, when adopted, those will be shared with the Public Works Department and our Transportation Department to go accomplish the goals that are outlined in Connect Dallas. For Climate Action Plan, CCAP, that was adopted in 2020 with the goal of bringing Dallas to carbon neutrality by 2050. Some of the many goals that are outlined in CCAP include exploring parking requirement reductions, considering mobility enhancements around transit, considering additional housing near transit, and collaborating with DART on a housing strategy at various DART station properties. And so, one of the main overarching goals for that was to have access to sustainable, affordable transportation options, and as a subset of that, synergizing land use and housing and transportation infrastructure to increase access to walking and biking as well as public transit. So there's numerous different recommendations in CCAP that align with the West Oak Cliff Area Plan, but two of the main ones are the goal of adopting a target corridor, district, or citywide mode split to help reinforce policies aimed at reducing single occupancy vehicle usage. And then another one is to develop a new comprehensive land use strategy in the upcoming comprehensive plan, so in Forward Dallas in that update, to pair with the strategic mobility plan and climate action goals with the goal of reducing transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions. Key to all of that is to have a well-articulated land use vision that thinks about locating jobs and housing near transit. The Dallas Sidewalk Master Plan was adopted last year. It essentially just lays out a framework for how the city prioritizes construction, sidewalk construction and repair based on factors such as equity. So is it a historically disinvested area? Issues of proximity to schools, parks, and transit. What the area plan did is identify the key streets that the neighborhood desired sidewalk improvements on, and those will be shared upon adoption with Public Works to go have those projects evaluated and included in upcoming capital projects list. And what we do know is that these projects score really highly due to their access to transit, they're near schools. This is an area that has been historically disinvested, so these projects are likely to move forward in the near future should the area plan be adopted. The economic development policy was adopted this year by council. It identifies specific actions related to identifying and removing discriminatory zoning and land use policies, developing a comprehensive suite of neighborhood preservation policies, delivering on diverse housing types and affordability levels throughout the city, focusing resources and access to capital to grow small businesses in high opportunity and underserved areas, reducing automobile dependence through promoting conditions for walkable development, walkable neighborhoods, including developing an inventory of infill to increase density, and then lastly, to review land use policies to heighten density around job centers and transit. So all of the recommendations that are outlined in the West Oak Cliff Area Plan align with those economic development policy goals. And then lastly, the comprehensive housing policy, which was adopted about 5 years ago by council and has had ongoing amendments. The comprehensive housing policy simply lays out a framework for the development and preservation of mixed income housing in the city. And the West Oak Cliff Area Plan took the various policies that are outlined in the comprehensive housing policy and outlines 7 strategies to preserve neighborhood affordability. And those include creation of dedicated income restricted units at the Hampton Dart Station through a public-private partnership, the creation of new missing middle housing in West Oak Cliff, the inclusion of a mixed income housing bonus in authorized hearings in West Oak Cliff, the creation of a neighborhood empowerment zone in the neighborhood, and also expansion of the housing department's various programs, including the Home Buyer Assistance Program, Housing Improvement and Repair Program, and some of their other programs that they have. So next, I'm going to talk about the missing middle housing and some of the design standards. So first, what I'll do is I'll just read the recommendation for clarity and then kind of go through each of the housing types. The recommendation is that in areas within a half mile of DART light rail stations, consider creating a zoning overlay using proposed conservation districts or creating a new infill residential zoning category to permit missing middle housing types, including ADUs, duplexes, triplexes and quadplexes, narrow lot single family, and cottage homes to be allowed by right, adhering to architectural and urban design standards to be determined on a neighborhood basis, aiming to avoid displacement of existing area residents and homeowners. Development would be required to follow existing city codes related to ADUs, parking requirements, setbacks, and massing standards. Again, this is a starting point for a potential zoning change. So this does not change the zoning. It simply says that the area plan recommends consideration of a future authorized hearing to be filed in this area to determine what the best strategy for zoning in this area would be. So this is just a more zoomed in map of the lots that are within a half mile of the DART stations, the Hampton Station and the Tyler Vernon Station. The areas in orange are the lots that are larger than 10,000 square feet. So these are lots that would be permitted to have triplexes or potentially greater on them. For all the other lots, which is 88% of those properties, the recommendation is to only allow accessory dwelling units and duplexes in those areas. As you can somewhat tell from the aerial, a lot of these areas are locations where there are existing churches or schools, or they have pretty severe topography or floodplain challenges. So although some of these lots are highlighted, many of them might not be constructible for various reasons. So I do just want to zoom in on one area that has a large number of those lots. This is just to the northwest of the Tyler Vernon DART Station. This is an area known as the South Edgefield neighborhood. So as we zoom in, what we can see is this whole area is zoned to R75, but there are a large number of lots that are over 3/4 of an acre in size or larger, some that are almost 1.5 acres in size. These are really large lots that only have a single home on them. Some of them are vacant. And the street view, you can kind of see that this is a largely rural, almost rural-like setting in terms of a lot of these streets don't have sidewalk or have poor sidewalks on them. Again, a lot of trees and open space. The current zoning does not permit anything more than one unit on them. And so based off city policy, we see this as an opportunity as a location where allowing some neighborhood scaled context sensitive density makes a lot of sense. We know that somebody could come in and replat some of these potentially to be smaller lots, but there's a lot of challenges with those due to the shape and configuration of those properties. So a more innovative solution is likely needed in these areas. We've got a lot of examples in Dallas of missing middle housing. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these areas, whether it's Oaklawn or Old East Dallas or North Oak Cliff. But West Oak Cliff also has examples of this that are grandfathered in some of these R75 neighborhoods, such as the North Cliff area or Sunset Hill. So I'm not going to go through each of the proposed design standards, but what I will highlight is setbacks. The recommendation is that for existing single-family setbacks to still apply, for massing requirements to stay the same, so height and lot coverage would still be the same, parking requirements would still be the same. On the topic of platting, we do have language in the plan that speaks specifically to this, that says that the combination of two adjacent lots into one single larger lot for the sake of allowing additional density is not permitted, or is not preferred. One additional consideration for this body is to add in language which would be maximum and minimum lot sizes should be considered as a part of any future zoning changes to ensure compatibility with the existing neighborhood fabric. And then on architectural requirements, those are best going to be handled through the conservation district process or through the authorized hearings to determine on a neighborhood basis what are the right architectural characteristics to consider. So I'll briefly go through each of these housing types. On duplexes, the main goal is to have neighborhood sensitive infill. If somebody wanted to, they could either repurpose an existing home to have 2 units in it, or they could, if they wanted to, redevelop an existing single-family lot into a new structure. The main goal is to not have what we see in a lot of areas of Dallas where we've got the double driveways, double garage doors, but instead have development that feels like the historic neighborhood around it, locating driveways and garages in the rear, having direct access out to the street, all of those things that we know contribute to good urban design and being good neighbors. In terms of triplexes, this is a map that I showed earlier. Again, this is only about 11% of those lots in these transit areas. Quadplexes are about 4% of the lots. And again, a lot of these are either existing churches or schools or impacted by floodplain and topography. For triplexes and quadplexes, the design considerations are generally the same in terms of locating parking and screening parking, how units and buildings fit contextually into a neighborhood in terms of setback and massing, but allowing units to front out to the street so that even though there's multiple units in a building, they still feel like the rest of the neighborhood. In terms of cottage homes, this is a really small percentage of the lots. It's about 1% of the total lots in the area. As you can see, the large number of them are concentrated around the Tyler Vernon Dart Station. Our recommendations, again, this is just a starting point, is to have a maximum density of 16 units per acre, have units that have frontage on public streets to directly engage with that street through front doors, porches, and stoops, have the same parking requirements as R75, but allow some visitor parking. And so I just wanted to show some massing diagrams that are in the area plan of what this might look like in terms of how units would fit on a lot. And it's also worth noting that the recommendation is that to have these homes be no larger than 1,500 square feet in size. So these are small cottages, not large single-family homes. Here's some more of those diagrams. And I did want to just highlight an example of one in another state. This is a long, deep, narrow lot, as you can tell. That's in a single-family context. You know, the units out on the street would engage with the street and feel like single-family homes around them, but it just simply allows for more units in the rear. And so this allows for some hidden density to come into a neighborhood in terms of allowing for smaller product types that we know are in demand, that are more affordable and attainable for local residents, and locating housing near transit without changing the character of the existing neighborhood. And then lastly, on the narrow lot single family, this is a really small percentage of the lots as well. This one is more difficult to do analysis on because our recommendations are for lots that are particularly wide and deep, so over 60 feet wide and over 150 feet deep. That's not something that's easily mapped in GIS, but through analysis, these are the areas that stood out. It's worth noting that South Oak Cliff Boulevard and Elmwood Boulevard are both in areas that the area plan is recommending considering the creation of a conservation district, and so the specifics for those areas would be best determined through that process. And how those would look and feel, it's essentially, and we discussed this last time, taking a duplex and allowing it to be split into 2 single-family units, knowing that that's a product type that's in demand. So in terms of the process for this, again, this is just a starting point. This is a consideration for a future zoning change. If the plan is adopted, CPC or council could file an authorized hearing request in these areas to further consider what the best zoning is. It's possible that the best tool is either conservation district, a zoning overlay, or a new infill residential zoning category, as is recommended in the plan, or it's possible that no change is what's recommended. And although the area plan is a starting point, this will best be informed through substantial community engagement in those specific neighborhoods. This will be, like any authorized hearing, property owners and owners adjacent to the area would be notified. And then in terms of, it's not just what's the best zoning, but also determining the best housing types, height and massing, and architecture and lot sizes. Those will be informed by additional community input. 2 other items for this body to consider that staff would like to recommend. I mentioned the first one, which is considering maximum and minimum lot sizes as a part of any future zoning changes to ensure compatibility with neighborhood fabric. The next 2 are to consider adding language into the plan about how a single lot that's in the middle of a block face, which maybe would qualify for additional density. So like the map that you see, that's a lot, that's a double lot, so it's larger than 10,000 square feet. It might make more sense for that to be treated differently than corner lots or lots that would qualify that have, like just to the block to the north that you can tell, have multiple large lots in a row. Having those one-off lots, we know could definitely change neighborhood character, and so it's worth considering adding language about how those specific lots are treated. And then lastly, consider adding language to ensure that the area would not be rezoned through a future authorized hearing to MF2, as we know that that's not the goal of this endeavor. The goal is to have a context-sensitive zoning change that's an overlay or some sort of a new category that keeps the neighborhood character, not an MF2 zoning change, which would permit additional height and also allow for things such as garden apartments to be constructed. Next, I'll just touch on some more about some of our engagement. In terms of engaging commercial businesses, we had 14 public meetings that I discussed last time, as well as over a dozen other meetings where we met with community groups. All input that was collected through those meetings were open to commercial property owners, residential property owners, renters, anybody in the area. All input was treated equally. In addition, we had meetings with various local business owners in the Hampton-Clarendon area, as well as with the Automotive Association of Oak Cliff. In addition to all of that, we helped local business owners navigate city services, where we met with them, listened to their concerns, and listened to how the area plan might best benefit their business. And then we met ongoing in person and over email and on calls with local business owners and property owners as requested. I'll be quick in going through this. In terms of the recommendations for small businesses, we have an entire section in our inclusive community development section about supporting a small business. The recommendations are to create a small-scale development community assistance program with the Office of Economic Development to support small-scale infill. Another recommendation is for the Dallas Small Business Center to have a promotional outreach strategy in West Oak Cliff about their various programs that they have. Additionally, have the Office of Economic Development establish an outreach strategy to educate local business owners about public-private partnerships. Fourth is to have a West Oak Cliff Business Task Force provide input on strategies and programs. This would serve as a liaison to local chambers of commerce, to the city, just to help promote small businesses and provide them the resources that they need. Fifth is to have the previously filed authorized hearings consider zoning mechanisms and a reimagined development approvals process for making things such as flexible and temporary retail space, reduced parking requirements, and an expedited review possible for local startup small businesses. And then lastly, at the Hampton Dart Station, through that public-private partnership, dedicating specific space to be for local startup small businesses, whether it's an incubator space or maker spaces. And then lastly, I'll touch on neighborhood support. As I mentioned last time, we've received some letters of support from neighborhood associations. We've received letters of support from 6 neighborhood associations, as well as Heritage Oak Cliff, which should have been shared with you yesterday evening. The Beverly Hills Neighborhood Association has also expressed concern through an additional letter, which has also been shared with you. And in terms of what this looks like on a map, the areas in darker yellow are the associations that we've heard support from. The areas in lighter yellow are the associations where we haven't heard support, and then the areas in white are areas where there are no neighborhood associations. The Polk Vernon Neighborhood Association has indicated that they intend to wait to issue a letter of support until after council adoption. I touched on this last time. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we are recommending some additional language changes on page 122 related to the Tyler Vernon Dart Station area, specifically related to the missing middle housing, based on what we've heard from the community and some concern about how it was worded in terms of support. And in terms of next steps, on the morning of the next CPC meeting on the 18th, we'll be conducting a van driving tour of the area, and this is the tentative route. And once again, staff's recommendation is approval with suggested additional changes in addition to any requested comments of the shared final draft of the area plan by this commission in order to advance it for review and adoption by council. So happy to answer any questions. I know that was a lot of material.
Thank you very much, Mr. Church. Fantastic presentation. We are ready for questions. Commissioner Stannard, please.
Yes, Mr. Church, that was quite quite a delivery, a lot to go. But, and I took copious notes here. Here's one of my main questions that I don't feel has been touched on in either meeting, which is, I've gotten a lot of letters about the non-engagement of the Hispanic community, and I'm concerned about this specifically, and numerous letters have cited the fact, and I think you always have to understand what cultural differences are, and numerous letters have said historically Hispanics don't trust government, they're a little hesitant until you reach out to them to get involved. So how has your committee, or you in the last 2 years, engaged the Hispanic community, and have you offered bilingual flyers and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, wonderful question. So when we started this process, it was in the height of the pandemic, so all of our meetings were held virtually. So our first meeting was conducted in November of 2020. That was the only meeting where we did not provide any sort of bilingual translation. We received a lot of feedback and concern from the community based on that. So we held the exact same meeting 6 weeks later in Spanish. And then from then on out, all of the remaining meetings, so the next 12 public meetings that the city held, had bilingual translation available at the meetings, but we also had all of our materials that were provided at those meetings, whether it was slides, flyers, any takeaways that people could take from our in-person meetings, all of our materials that were on boards at those meetings, all of that was conducted bilingually. In addition to all of that, we had numerous pop-up events in the neighborhood at Hispanic grocery stores with bilingual staff there, so we could meet people where they are. And we mailed out 8,000 bilingual flyers through DISD to every student in West Oak Cliff, knowing that that was one of the best ways to get word and communication home to families in the area.
Just as one quick follow-up. So you're saying, and I understand this, so you took under DISD the bilingual and you sent it to those students that were enrolled to let them know. So, and otherwise, I'm assuming you have notifications in the newspapers, but, we don't know how engaged the Hispanic community is with newspapers. So is there any other way that you reached out to them, contacted them to get them involved?
So we specifically worked with all of the neighborhood associations in the area to notify their neighbors. We were really fortunate to have a lot of community advocates in the area that did a lot of block walking in some areas that are heavily Hispanic that maybe don't have neighborhood associations to get the word out. So they passed out flyers and helped notify about meetings. We worked with Hispanic media organizations. There were some articles that were released through Hispanic Paper. And in addition to all of that, we also we, used all of our forms of social media that we have, and all of that was conducted bilingually as well.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Statter. Commissioner Carpenter, please.
Yes, Mr. Church, I have a question about the letters of support that we received, because I know 3 of them are absolutely identical, especially in their, the body of the letter, which gives their support. And they specifically say, these 3 neighborhood associations, that they support land use recommendations that will guide the preservation of our single-family neighborhoods while allowing for gentle density and more retail uses, specifically, I added that word, along our commercial borders. And my concern, I've expressed it in previous meetings, is I just think I think these letters are expressing their support for what they understood, their neighborhood's recommendations to be. And, I read the entire 179-page report, every footnote, every table, everything. And it's clear that the message was fairly consistent that, you received from the input. But my problem is when it gets to the recommendations, and once again, I understand the constraints you were working under because you had to listen to the neighborhood input, and you're also trying to incorporate what all of these relatively new council plans on transit-oriented development and CCAP and all that. But where I think we've landed is a report that isn't really isn't following the recommendations of the neighborhood, and that concerns me that there's a pretty sharp split. And I understand that the single-family neighborhoods that are in, I believe it was 67% of the area aren't really affected by the increased density, but this other percentage, the third, those within 1,500 feet of the transit stations or a quarter mile of Jefferson, what this report is recommending is not what these neighborhoods were supporting. So I guess I'll stop there and just ask how we can move forward with such a dichotomy there.
Sure. So on some of the neighborhoods that are in that half-mile area around transit, many of them have issued letters of support. So those would be East Hampton Hills, Elmwood, Hampton Hills, and Jimtown. All of those areas are around the Hampton DART station and the Tyler Vernon DART station. They have issued letters of support. We don't get involved in a neighborhood association's politics, and so we know that a neighborhood association board might choose to issue a letter of support, and there might be individuals within that neighborhood association that don't necessarily support the plan. That's not for us to decide and intervene on. What we do know is, from what we heard through public engagement through the last 2 years, is there are voices, and a large number of them in West Oak Cliff, that support allowing for a greater mixture of uses on the commercial corridors and considerations for some additional density that fits into the neighborhood contextually in certain locations. And that's what the area plan outlines.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Commissioner Carpenter, do you have a follow-up?
I'll defer to it.
Thank you. Commissioner Young.
Yes, let me start with some questions relating to the platting process. The cottage court building style, is that contemplated to be a multifamily use or a single-family use? And that is to say, is each cottage court on a separate platted lot?
Typically, those are one platted lot that are in some sort of an HOA or some sort of a community land trust that would own the property, and people would simply be leasing the land that their structure is on.
So when you say that the same setbacks would apply as single family, you're saying the entire aggregate lot would have the same front and side and rear yard setbacks as the single family?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, next, relating to the narrow lot single family, if that is being created out of existing lots that form a pattern, how do you envision that being accomplished consistent with Section 8.503 of the plat regulations?
So in terms of the specifics of 8.503, I'll defer to the city attorney's office. What I will say is, the idea is there's two different ways that these could occur. It could be, it could maintain itself as a single individual platted lot with two structures on it, which would be permitted since we're recommending duplexes to be allowed.
Sort of a detached duplex, if you will.
A detached duplex. The other alternative would be to replat that lot into two separate lots, which would be obviously half the size of the previous lot. So that would be different from the existing neighborhood fabric surrounding it. That is correct.
Okay, and if the commission were convinced that there was an existing pattern of which this would be half normal width, then we would be obligated to disapprove that replat.
Ultimately, that would be this commission's decision. But you could make that decision that if somebody wanted to replat into two different lots and you found it to be inconsistent, then yes, that is true.
Okay. Next, I can't remember which slide, but you had something about the combination of two or more lots for the purpose of achieving additional density is not preferred. There we go, the first highlighted portion. Let's assume, contrary to my previous example, that there is no pattern in the area. We are obliged to approve a replat if it meets the platting regulations and the zoning regulations. So the current plat regulations leave no room for us to say, well, this meets the plat regulations and it meets the zoning regulations, but it's not preferred, so we're going to deny it. So how do we implement that section?
The specifics of that need to be determined through those authorized hearings in terms of establishing, specific dimensions or square footages of what a lot might be. That is more detailed than we were able to dive into for the specifics of this area plan, but I do think that it is something that the authorized hearings can and should address.
Well, I submit to you that if what we're talking about is changing the lot size and configuration requirements within an authorized hearing area, we can potentially do that. But if we're talking about introducing a discretionary plat disapproval process, that I think that would require some pretty major surgery to the plat regulations.
That is correct, and that's not the recommendation's not to re-envision the process of 8.503. It's simply, again, this bullet is just a starting point for the language that would go into a draft authorized hearing rezoning for an area.
So that would then be implemented through lot size and configuration limitations in the CD or PD for particular subparts of the area.
Correct, yeah, that would be one mechanism.
Okay. Next topic, would you go to slide 30, please? Okay, this follows up on my questions from 2 weeks ago. As I read this slide, what the plan says is consider the missing middle housing within a half mile of the two DART stations. Well, consider means discuss and evaluate and judge and include or not include as the circumstance strike the decision makers. Then your fourth bullet point says the area plan will serve as a starting point for draft zoning changes. That is what concerns me, because it seems to me that puts a thumb on the scale of the consideration. We start with, I guess, if you will, a rebuttable presumption that mixed middle housing, missing middle housing is appropriate within these areas. Do you agree with that?
I agree that the area plan states that missing middle housing is appropriate, yes.
Okay, and you are comfortable making that a priori decision now without the kind of detailed and focused community engagement process that would go on in an authorized public hearing?
Yes, I am, based on what we heard from the community through our 14 meetings, as well as what we know is best from a perspective of following adopted city policies passed by council.
All right, thank you.
I have questions.
Commissioner Blair?
I want to touch more on the missing middle housing. It seems to me that this area plan or this authorized hearing does not give credence in a prescription how to fix the missing middle housing. Does it or does it not?
It doesn't provide a roadmap to getting it constructed, but currently it's not permitted. So our starting point is to say a zoning change would be needed to even allow it to occur, because right now nothing can occur in most of these areas except for single-family homes. And so if the missing middle housing is defined as the duplexes up to anything that's less than multifamily, that can't be constructed today. And so our recommendation is in certain areas, it makes sense to allow those to be constructed. By whom and how is to be determined by a private property owner.
So are you saying that it is the belief of your body that the only way to remediate the missing middle housing is through duplexes and not through single-family ownership?
So again, for 88% of the areas around these DART stations, it would remain single-family and duplexes. For 67% of West Oak Cliff, we're recommending no change whatsoever. So those would be completely single-family, not even accessory dwelling units. But in terms of what, missing middle housing is currently missing. That's why it's called missing middle housing. And so the purpose is to allow for some of these to even be possible. And knowing that they are smaller in square footage and more affordable in terms of price points, this was something that the Area Plan Task Force, based on community input and based on staff's recommendations and guidance related to adopted city policies, felt was the best mechanism to allow for some additional neighborhood affordability without changing the neighborhood character substantially.
Can I continue? So when you're saying, so maybe, I guess, for me, I need to understand, and can you help me do that, as to what this body considered the criteria for being a middle income, the missing middle income that maybe or maybe not we can satisfy.
So just to clarify, missing middle housing talks about housing types. So those would be anything in a range from duplexes to triplexes and quadplexes to cottage courts, all the way up to anything that's less than a multifamily. So that's the housing, missing middle housing. In terms of mixed income, and when we're thinking about affordability, we would be following the city's AMI requirements. And so our recommendations about allowing these additional product types in a neighborhood don't specifically speak to affordability. The idea is that, and this was something that we discussed with our task force, the mortgage on a new construction for single family in West Oak Cliff is unattainable to the median income of that area, as well as the median income for the city of Dallas. We're not permitted to income restrict unless through the authorized hearing for allowing this missing middle housing, it was decided that it would only be permitted to grant such missing middle housing if it was to be income restricted. But that's probably not something that's legal by state law. But the idea is by allowing additional supply, we help alleviate some of the demand in the area and help to bring down price points generally by just simply having more product available for residents and neighbors and families to live in.
So, and let me put a different slant on it. When we look at the platting process in 8.503, and we're looking at where you're looking to do this around the DART transit stations, then you're saying that in order to change the dynamics of what's consistent based on 8.503? Or it would then need to be reviewed through legal to say that 8.503 needs to be rewritten or rethought so that you could change the character and the size of the community based on the needs around the DART station?
We're not recommending that 8.503 be rewritten. What we are recommending is that if the zoning currently today states that a lot can be no smaller than 7,500 square feet, we don't allow for any lots to be smaller than that. But if the zoning were changed to allow for a lot, for instance, to be 2,500 square feet, or for a lot to be subdivided in different dimensional ways, which are not currently permitted by the R75 zoning, that's what needs to be reconsidered.
So until that is reconsidered, then the R75 or the R10 or the R5 or whatever it is, R16, in that particular community is to stay the same, correct?
That is correct. The zoning will not change until an authorized hearing with substantial community engagement moves forward. We're only recommending that authorized hearing be considered to be even presented to the community and to this body.
And historically, in this particular community is an older community, correct?
Predominantly. The demographics trend younger, but we have a lot of homeowners that have been there for 30 or more years.
So the lots were built out and platted based on the age of that community, correct?
Correct. The neighborhood was built in the 20s through the 30s generally in most of these areas.
So through this process, in order to engage in or to introduce the missing middle housing, you would have to change the dynamics of the historical culture and sizing that has been in existence since the 20s, correct?
That's possible. Again, there are missing middle housing. There are areas in these areas that we see today within a half mile of DART stations where there are duplexes and as well as quadplexes. So some of that exists. It's just grandfathered in before the zoning was changed to be single family in the 60s.
Okay, then I want to change the topic to transit and mobility. In your presentation, you're saying that this authorized hearing is to look at ways to get people out of single-family out of one person cars, and to get them more into walking and into DART. But what do you do, and how do you, since DART is not part of this body, how do you tie this to DART that's not part of the body, that does not have to play with or have to adhere to any recommendations that come from this body?
So we don't make any specific recommendations for DART to take any action. We did work hand in hand with them and met with them multiple times. During this process, they changed their bus network, and actually in doing so, they increased bus frequency in the area on many streets. And our recommendation, they removed a route or two, but then increased frequency on streets like Hampton and Jefferson. And our recommendation is to make it easier for people to get to transit. So we've got numerous sidewalks that are listed in our plan that show. Right now, it's not safe to even walk to transit, so many people don't make that decision because they can't get there. And so it's imperative for the city to make investment to make it easier. That's what we can influence. And we know that the DART light rail stations are not going to go anywhere since they're a very substantial investment. And so it's important for the city to make investments around the DART stations as well in terms of improving mobility, whether it's bike lanes or sidewalks.
And I think this is going to be probably about my last question. When you say that, and you're saying that basically, in order to get the mobility the way you want it, the infrastructure within this particular community needs to be reassessed and re-identified so that any missing infrastructure that will provide for safe passage, whether it be by bus or by walking, would need to happen in order for this area plan to take place.
The recommendation is that if adopted, the area plan will allow for these projects to be prioritized by those departments. I think that those have to happen simultaneously with any land use changes, as we know that there's a direct correlation between land use and transportation. But the area plan can advance without these occurring, but the area plan is recommending that these do occur as a roadmap for the next 20 years for development and simply improving quality of life for residents in the area.
Thank you. Vice Chair Rubin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you go back to slide number 30, please, Mr. Church? This is following up, I think, on some of Commissioner Young's questions. And in that fourth bullet point, you mentioned that the area plan will serve as the starting point for draft zoning changes. Can you explain how, if an authorized hearing comes to be in one of these areas, what you mean by it serving as a starting point?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned last time, there are 5 previously filed authorized hearings. We specifically speak to each of those areas in the plan, their focus areas. We've got some pretty detailed land use recommendations. That would be with our authorized hearing team in the Planning and Urban Design Department. They will turn those recommendations into codified language for zoning. If an authorized hearing were to move forward or be advanced after adoption for one of these areas, such as the areas that we're talking about right now, the same process would occur. Once that authorized hearing moves up in the queue and is ready to be processed because there's staff capacity to do it, staff would take the recommendations that are outlined in the plan and turn that into codified zoning and say, here's what we heard. At the same time, there would be at least two or three public meetings where that would be presented, and staff would make changes and react to community feedback, so that if we heard overwhelmingly through an authorized hearing for one of these areas, we don't want any of that, then we would come back and respond accordingly and explain the changes that we made so that it's in alignment with what the property owners of the area want.
And with respect to the missing middle in a potential authorized hearing, again, you've referenced these potential missing middle options as a starting point, right?
Correct.
So if staff were to hear feedback about particular missing middle options that are on the current menu that staff has set out, that there are significant concerns, could those be pared back?
Yes, they could be.
Okay. And the other thing was that when this area plan advanced from the comp plan committee, there was specific language inserted in the document, or a recommendation for language to be inserted in the document about, considering missing middle, but not to the point where it would lead to displacement of existing area residents or homeowners, right?
That is correct. That's how the recommendation's worded now.
So at some point, staff would need to evaluate whether advancing or moving forward with a particular type of missing middle housing would either contribute or alleviate missing middle or displacement, right?
Correct, yes. Through the authorized hearing process, staff would be able to and would undertake that analysis.
And would that be done in conjunction with PUD and housing and other city?
Yeah, planning and urban design would be the lead. We would definitely work with our housing department and economic development and use their expertise as well.
So for just taking one example of the missing middle, if cottage courts, it turned out empirically would be a bad solution in terms of only exacerbate displacement, then at that point staff's recommendation as to cottage courts could change, and that staff might say that it's not appropriate.
That's correct.
Or if cottage courts conversely would seem to alleviate some of the displacement pressure, then staff might keep a recommendation of cottage courts in.
Yes.
And then ultimately it would go to CPC and council for them to consider those issues as well.
That's correct.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Young.
I hesitate to pursue this metaphor. It may backfire on me, but I'll try it anyway. We talked just a minute ago about a menu. This is not a restaurant menu where I sit down and the waiter says, here are the options, sir, what would you like? This is more of a banquet menu where I sit down and there's a card in front of me that says, here's what you're having for dinner, And if I call the waiter over and I say, I don't like asparagus, I'd rather have broccoli, can I substitute? Maybe the answer is yes. But you're going to present the public meetings at these authorized hearings with a banquet menu that says, here's what you're getting unless you tell me you don't want it.
So at the public meetings that we had, and we specifically had detailed meetings just for the Hampton Station area as well as just for the Tyler Vernon Station area, we presented that diner menu that would have had everything on it, whether it was parking lots, commercial. We didn't present industrial because obviously we don't want industrial next to housing, but we presented different commercial uses all the way up to multifamily that was 5 to 8 stories tall. We presented that entire suite of options and used detailed surveys, picture preference surveys, and what we heard was certain uses people preferred, others nobody wanted, and so then that's how we move forward to present this banquet menu, as you referred to. That's what the area plan would use as a starting point, since we've already heard from the community that they don't want certain things. And so the purpose of the area planning process is to begin to narrow down and identify that vision, and the specific authorized hearing process will refine that banquet menu even further. That said, if we heard through the authorized hearing process that something that we aren't including in the area plan, the community sentiment has changed and they want something included, then that could be considered as well.
Well, but the decision to then synthesize that public input into your recommendation was made by a steering committee composed of the entire study area with perhaps only 1 or 2 representatives from those specific DART station areas, and by city staff, which obviously has a citywide perspective.
That is correct. So there was a steering committee of 16 members. There's a representative from every neighborhood or every neighborhood association. The way that steering committee really operated was that if it was a detailed recommendation targeting a specific neighborhood, the committee tended to default to listening to the advice of the representative on that task force from that area, as well as maybe neighborhoods directly adjacent. And people really tended to only focus, if it was something specifically for a neighborhood, they allowed the voice from that neighborhood to provide kind of the steering, guiding voice for that recommendation.
But elsewhere in your recommendation, I see that you're recommending specifically calling out the fact that in at least one or maybe both, I don't remember, of the DART station areas, there was significant opposition to the missing middle, I'll get that right eventually, housing options.
That is correct. That is, what we've heard from community advocates in the area. At the same time, through our engagement process, we heard numerous voices that were in support of even far more density than what we were recommending. And at the same time, through our online interactive maps, I remember we had that area specifically highlighted, and it was 19 to 19 in terms of people who wanted to see more density and people who wanted to see no change. And so it was very much a split consensus. And so knowing that we've got adopted city policy that speaks to additional housing near transit, staff's recommendation was to advance something that the task force supported that was a moderate change without allowing for large multifamily and townhomes, which is the main item that we heard specifically from the community, was a desire to see no townhomes and no multifamily for fear of displacement.
Okay, well, so there was a consensus on that, but not on those missing middle housing options that are shown in the recommendation.
Correct, yeah, there was split consensus.
I'll have more to say at the public hearing about deferring to citywide policies on local area planning. Thank you.
Commissioner Stanton.
Oh, Commissioner Hampton should go first because I've already spoken.
Perfectly fine. Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you, Commissioner Standard. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Church, thank you. This was a great presentation. I think, as Commissioner Carpenter said, there's a lot of information in this plan. I think the District 1 has continually shown really great thinking on how they want to see their community develop, everything from, looking at how we're using our public right-of-way and advocating for better transit options. And I think a lot of that's reflected in the information before us. I've got 3 main questions, but I want to start by asking, is it possible for you to share this presentation with us?
Absolutely, I can do it after
That would be
after
helpful,
this.
I think, maybe to focus some of your recommendations that I'm trying to track. So I want to follow up on some of the discussion about this question about lot size and how it might be thought about to encourage some incremental density. And you had mentioned, I think just recently, your recent comments about DART stations and how we are transit and how we think about additional density surrounding that. In those conversations, or in the recommendations, I guess even more importantly, are there provisions that would talk about the transitions that would be suggested between the stable residential communities and where additional density might be considered?
We don't specifically speak to that, and I think that the main purpose is we know that the transition from quadplexes and duplexes to single family is about as subtle as it can be. If there is additional language that that this commission would like the plan to consider, then that could be included.
Well, I think it goes back to some of the other comments that, as we understand it, this will become the template for how the authorized hearings are moving forward. And if that's something that should be considered, it would seem important to make sure that we get that defined, just again, as a consideration in those conversations. A follow-up question on that is, as you all were considering how to allow for incremental density, perhaps considering smaller lot sizes, you mentioned open space in the context of community serving open space, but was there a consideration of minimum open space requirements when you're looking at this additional residential density?
We don't have any specifics in terms of percentage. I definitely think that good cottage courts communities have a large percentage of their land dedicated to being private open space for those residents. And in terms of whether it's a quadplex or any of these other housing types, it would be the same lot coverage as would be required for single families. So it would be over 60% of the lot would be dedicated as private open space. Does that answer your question?
I think so. And I guess where I see a little bit of the disconnect, so I see the cottage court and then I see the narrow lot single family in your presentation. And I think what the graphic, and I apologize, I don't recall what slide it was on, but it's showing the maximum that could be built, which leaves very little open space, usable open space, I guess I would say. Did staff evaluate through this process if there were other models in the city where perhaps there has been this type of infill single-family housing that might give them a reference point on how this was considered moving forward?
So we did, and there are very few, if any, examples in Dallas, and there's really an economic reason behind that. The areas that this would be permitted would either be cluster housing, and there's only 3 properties in the entire city zoned for cluster housing, or it would be MF2 or some sort of multifamily. And what we do know in properties that are zoned multifamily is oftentimes their land valuation is such that developers are going to maximize their build out to maximize their profit. And so this development potential right here would not maximize profit over what an MF2 might be able to provide, since it would be a garden apartment of some kind. And so this is rarely, if ever, constructed in Dallas, but in other cities it is constructed.
And I guess that goes back to what I understand is going to be discussed during the authorized hearing, is if there was a rezoning change, and if, for instance, the desire is to have additional density, couldn't the provisions of a potential MF2 district be tailored to allow for the smaller lot size, encourage ownership opportunities, and define design standards that would reflect this type of, cottage home or other similar product type?
That's absolutely a possibility if that's something that the community and staff thinks is the best path forward.
Okay, and again, I recognize this community needs to be their own best advocate, and I look forward to hearing from them. Final question for you, back to the discussion on the lot sizes, how those might be considered. I heard you mention that interior lots, for this, that might disrupt the block face, wouldn't be recommended, or preferred, excuse me, was your word. But where is that concept captured within these recommendations on where this might be recommended?
Are you speaking specifically to the second bullet here on this slide, or?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, that's not currently in the plan, and that's something that
You're suggesting
we're recommending
this
this
body
committee consider, yes.
Okay. Thank you, and I think that's why I put a star by it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have some other questions, but thank you, Mr. Church.
Thank you. Commissioner Stanton.
Yes. I want to recap and ask, I have 3 questions. My first one, I don't know which one to do first. My first one has to do with asking you the question, did you, in this process, and we all know, area plans are merely recommendations. They get approved by the city council, so everybody's on board, but they have no legal mandate that they have to be followed, correct?
That is correct.
Correct.
I mean, ultimately requires
Okay.
implementation.
So we see what this process is going to be, and you said an authorized hearings. How many authorized hearings are you proposing? Is this one for the half-mile area around the transit station, or do you envision 3 or 4?
That would be, I mean, so there are 5 that have already been filed. Those were filed up to 5 years ago. In these areas around transit, the recommendation would be to start with just one for each of the radiuses, so each of the half-mile areas, one around the Hampton station, one around the Tyler Vernon station. We do know that within that, there are properties that are zoned single-family and there are properties that are zoned commercial, and those might need to be handled separately, and maybe they would get divided up into 2 different authorized hearings if that process made sense. But the starting point would just be one for each area.
Okay. And do you anticipate, once again, I mean, I understand they get into queues, I get it, but this thing of every time an authorized hearing taking 5 years, kind of things have changed by the time you end up with, the proposal. So are we talking about, as we approve this area plan, if we do that we're ending up 5 years from now until something is actually implemented?
That the goal is to avoid that. So the process was changed in 2019. It used to be first come, first serve. So the authorized hearings that this body has been hearing of late, we're at the tail end of that, where a authorized hearing was filed and it sat in line. Now there's a scoring criteria. So these, because they have an area plan that specifically speaks to them, these would move to the front of the line. So the 5 that have already been filed and have been waiting for those 3 to 5 years, those would immediately advance upon adoption. These other ones that are recommending areas that haven't had one filed yet, but we're saying one should be considered, those would be next. And obviously those have to be scored against the other authorized hearings in the city. So it may take more than a year or 2,
Right.
but
Okay.
it's purely based on staff capacity.
Right. Because sometimes I feel like the whole geography and everything changes in 5 years when it takes that long. Now, here is the next thing I want to go to, which has to do with this thing of cottage houses. And the reason I bring specifically that up is because I'm questioning, did you discuss with developers in this? We go theoretically in these proposals and we say, wouldn't this be a great housing option? And theoretically, this looks great. But let me tell you, there's no developer in the city of Dallas that's going to come in and build 8 cluster houses and lease the land. It's just not going to happen because they can't realize the money from the land quick enough. So they usually do shared access, like Mr. Baldwin here, constantly representing David Weekly on that. Okay. And those shared access places, you actually are, you begin with one platted area, but you actually are selling the lots, which can be 3,500 square feet and can have exactly what you're proposing, a small 2,800 square foot house on it. So instead of this cottage houses, how have you, I have two questions based on this. Did you discuss, get input from developers, what they actually might do to provide this missing middle housing? What works for them as well? I understand you're looking at the neighborhood, but you want it to be realistic. And where would you fit in a shared access which might provide this missing middle, but might take 3 acres to put 18 houses on it? So how have you provided for that in your plan?
So speaking to, in terms of talking to developers, we did a couple of things. One, we analyzed other cities and understood their best practices in terms of, units per acre, square footages, all of that. In addition, we have a member of our task force, Paul Carden, who is a developer in his day job, and so he worked with the task force to just kind of run some back of the envelope pro forma numbers to explain what that might look like. So we did do some of the economic analysis to understand it. In terms of the shared access, a shared access agreement or a shared access development is something that could possibly be achieved here. Again, the specifics would need to be determined through what the zoning looks like. But what we heard time and time again throughout the process from the community is the desire to not see townhomes. And I know that David Weekley homes are technically single-family homes, but there was a strong desire to not see that product type in the area. And those are typically 2,000 square feet or larger and 3 bedrooms. So people wanted something smaller, no more than 1.5 stories. We routinely heard that from the public. And so our recommendations would be to not permit or not consider any sort of a zoning that would allow for that kind of shared access development. If a shared access development agreement for some sort of a cottage court wants to be done, then that's something that could be considered.
Okay. Well, again, that's just my statement. I question that a cottage court is going to work from an investment thing, but that's another story. Okay. Now, I'm always for clarification. I want to make sure I'm clear about this because I tried to listen carefully. But based on this area plan, you listed 3 things that I understand. I want to make clear on what you're asking this commission to possibly add on to what you've already done. And you're saying to have maximum, minimum lot sizes. Is that correct? That's one of them.
That's correct.
Number 2, that given what Commissioner Hampton was talking about, you talked about what do you do if you're in an area, within this area, and in the middle of the block, you've got a double lot, let's say. You want us to make recommendations for how that double lot, maybe it could be used for a quadruplex, is that what you're saying?
Or be considered or be treated differently so that it would only be a single-family home or a duplex and not be considered for this missing middle product type, since that might make more sense at the corners, at corner lots, but not in the middle of a block.
Okay. And then lastly, you want no MF2 in the future, or not even garden apartments, and you want us to put in nor townhouses. But now you seem to be saying, because I wouldn't think of those David Weekley homes the same way, but you are. I'm just clarifying. So you want us to make sure we include in this area plan no MF2 and no townhouse structures for the missing middle.
We specifically heard from the community the desire to see no apartments and townhomes, and so that's something that this body could consider. In addition to that, there's this slide that was just the small text changes in that one section about the Tyler Vernon Station area.
Correct.
So
okay.
there'd be those 4 changes. That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Popkin.
Just one quick question for you, Mr. Church, and I'll save a couple of my other questions for the public hearing this afternoon. But I've heard community members mention that the area around Hampton and Clarendon should have a maximum of 3 stories. I'm not finding that in the text. All I'm finding is a reference to a 54-foot height. Can you clarify what's going on there?
So in the Hampton Clarendon area, it is on the text. I can find the page and the exact text for you here before the public hearing. But the recommendation is a maximum height of 54 feet, which is currently permitted in CR. But we also know, and this was something that we discussed with our task force, if the current RPS applies, which is what our recommendation is, a third story would not be feasible to be constructed due to the proximity to single family on all sides.
Is it appropriate to leave that height limitation as it relates to multifamily, or I guess single family nearby, and how that residential proximity slope works, since that's not likely to change? I guess, do you have a duty to respect the existing zoning? Is that what's going on here?
Ultimately, the city can decide to change the zoning to whatever we see fit. At the same time, the 54 feet that's currently permitted is in alignment with some of our districts, such as Article 13's WMU2, which is for 3 stories, and that's 50 feet. And so it was simply kind of a legal decision based on not changing development entitlements. But the goal is to maintain the area for 3 stories and no more than that.
Okay, and so primarily that'll be regulated by RPS, if that's included in any zoning changes that are made to that area, or is RPS a part of that existing zoning regulation?
Currently, CR is regulated by RPS, and our recommendation is that the same appropriate RPS ratio be applied here.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity. And I'll save the rest of my questions for the hearing. Appreciate your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes, Mr. Church, are you seeing the same pathway to displacement of current residents that I'm visualizing if these recommendations for inserting missing middle housing are followed? Because what I'm visualizing is if the zoning is changed to allow for more density, whether it's triplexes or cottage homes, whichever of these go forward, it would make developers willing to pay a great deal more money for the land than what they'd be willing to pay for a single-family home. And so it wouldn't take long before you had a sale or two in the neighborhood showing, greatly inflated sale prices for DCAD to pick up and say, oh, land is selling for, a lot more money in this neighborhood, so we're going to raise the land values considerably in this area. And at that point, you've got, renters especially would be, driven out in great numbers, I would think, because the landlords would have to, raise rents a great deal to cover their increased taxes. And then also people who are just living in their homes and their taxes are going up, up, up. Is there any consideration? Are you seeing that same, are you troubled at all, or do you see that pathway that I'm seeing?
I will say personally, absolutely, I'm troubled by the fear of displacement and the potential for displacement. We know that could occur today, even with single family, because it's beginning to occur, and people are buying old homes that are in poor condition and developing them into large, maximum build-out single family. The recommendations outlined in the area plan, there's that 7-pronged approach in terms of using all of the tools that exist in our arsenal that are adopted city policies today, whether it's the home improvement repair program or whether it's the neighborhood empowerment zone. We have to deploy all of those at the same time, as well as thinking about increasing supply. What we do know is that in areas that already have additional development entitlement, there are numerous areas in West Oak Cliff that are single family in character but are zoned TH3. Mm-hmm. Those are areas that are, because of the way TH3 is written, are usually built out as duplexes, so they are duplexes. And those are areas that have the same land value today as directly across the street, which is zoned R75. So currently the economics have not changed those areas, and those are areas that are adjacent to transit as well, near the Westmoreland station. I'm not saying that it's not possible in the future. We don't know what the market's going to do in the future, but we haven't seen it today.
Well, having recently gone through DCAD hearings that did not go exactly the way I wanted them to, I can say there are considerably different valuations being put on property that is underlying townhome zoning than is adjacent to R75. Even with neighborhoods, because in our particular neighborhood, part of our neighborhood got overlaid with townhome zoning back during cumulative zoning overlay, and now almost all of those houses have been torn down and replaced with new townhomes, and those. The price per square foot for those lots are, like 2.5 times what it is for single family homes. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay. Mr. Church, can you maybe email Ms. Hernandez your PowerPoint so maybe we can take a peek at it during lunch?
Absolutely.
She'll distribute it to all the commissioners. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent job, Mr. Church. Commissioners, we will swing back just for an update on case number 7, Z212207. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good afternoon now. Jason, do I have, okay. Okay, so I was feverishly updating the PowerPoint and kind of got partway through, so I'm going to wing it a little bit as we go here. Okay, so just by way of reminder, this is Z212207, and the initial application is for an LI Light Industrial District on property zoned AA Agricultural on the northwest line of Telephone Road between Bonneview and Van Horn Drive. Just noting the concerns at the last briefing really had to do with the adjacent single-family use, which I've added location information here. So the main structure of the single-family use is near that shared property line with the request site, and then the accessory garage for that single-family use is to the front of the main structure, set back 50 feet from the front property line. That the front structure that is accessory to the single family, staff understands that there is a business operating out of it. However, it's not a CO'd business, and so officially to the city, this is an accessory garage, just a reminder, FYI. And fast forwarding to changes. So this one has kind of gone back and forth quite a bit. I apologize for the all the words on one slide, but so initially, prior to the previous hearing, the applicant had verbally offered some deed restrictions, providing a 20 to 30 foot buffer along the west boundary line of the request site, and restricting vehicular traffic and overhead doors for loading and unloading to the east side of any new buildings. So those were verbally offered, but we hadn't received those deed restrictions from the applicant in time to get the information into the docket. So our recommendation at the last hearing was denial. However, the morning of that hearing, we did receive deed restrictions, didn't have a chance to review them, and requested that the case be held under advisement to today, which you did graciously. And since then, the following morning, the applicant indicated to staff that they had arranged to purchase the adjacent property, and then deed restrictions would no longer be needed. So we submitted information in today's docket that indicated we were requesting that the case be held under advisement until the 18th so that we could re-advertise the expanded area of request. However, I feel like I'm narrating a soap opera a little bit. So thank you for bearing with me. So the saga continues. And yesterday, the applicant went ahead and re-offered deed restrictions, and those were, I believe, circulated to all the commissioners yesterday evening. Staff has not, I've opened them and I've kind of looked through them to know basically what's being offered, but haven't reviewed them in great detail. So, kidding? Man. Okay, so I just threw these onto the slide. This is the gist of the deed restrictions that are being offered. Maximum building height, 50 feet. A building prohibited within 60 feet of the west property line. Overhead doors for truck loading and unloading. Not restricted to the east side of buildings, but not allowed on the west side of buildings. And then a minimum 10-foot wide landscape buffer required along the western property line. And then there's a list of uses that are prohibited. So the initial concerns that led to staff's recommendation of denial were twofold. Truck traffic that would be internal to the site on the west side of any new buildings where the property line is shared with the adjacent single-family use. And also then commercial truck loading, unloading, or stopping and standing, basically truck noise, without sufficient buffering from adjacent single-family use. So I really just wanted you to see the cross-outs and adds and changes or anything just for entertainment purposes. Anyway, so we went from denial in the staff report to hold it under advisement in the briefing, and in today's staff report, hold under advisement. And I'm going to update that to say I actually would even modify from what I was able to write here. So the concerns that staff had initially, those two concerns, were allayed by the verbally offered deed restrictions. And so staff was prepared to recommend approval. However, in looking at the deed restrictions that are offered, they're not quite accomplishing the same thing, so staff's recommendation is going to remain as denial. And with that, questions?
Thank you very much. Commissioner Stanton.
Just a quick one, because I don't want to have to look it up. How different are these deed restrictions from the ones we saw before?
I'm not sure what was seen before.
Because I did see something before. How did I see this?
We didn't review any before.
Yeah.
We had requested that it be held so that we could review them, but then the next morning, the need for them went away.
Oh, okay.
So.
Because the deal didn't go through, I got it. I thought we were going to get a commission, but anyway. Okay, so.
You don't watch many soap operas.
I know. This does not, so what is it that you feel does not answer then in these deed restrictions the needs?
Well, one concern would be that buildings are prohibited within 60 feet of the western property line. It seems to actually go against prohibiting traffic. It's actually going to allow truck traffic and stopping and standing on that side of the building. There's excess room over there, and there's no limitation to what can happen over there. So there's a 10-foot landscape buffer, which would, that's something that would likely be required at permitting anyway. That's not really anything newsworthy. And specifying the wide width, it just allows the traffic that we're concerned about.
Are they proposing like a U traffic?
We don't have a site plan. This is a general zoning
right.
change. So,
Okay.
so we're looking at.
But that would allow them to have one of those sort of U's. You go in and you come around.
Right. So when I did discuss with the applicant's representative after the last hearing, I brought up the concern with the 60-foot spacing between and what that meant for truck traffic, and they indicated that there would probably be a need for trucks to enter and loop around, but I don't have a site plan that could confirm that.
Yeah, I remember his representative at the last one saying that they would do that, and we discussed maybe having the shore power to mitigate, but they didn't want to commit to that. Okay.
So the other part of that, though, would be with the placement of the doors. it was staff's understanding that they were going to be restricted to the east side of the building, and that's, it's sort of it's a minor change of the wording, but restricting them to the east side is not the same as saying they won't be on the west side. In other words, they can be on the north and south side and still adjacent to where that single family is without being buffered by the building itself. So staff was in support of the verbally offered because if they're restricted to the east side, the buffer is the building and the 20-foot, say, landscape buffer, and that's not present in the deed.
Correct, which seems much more reasonable if the residential remains next door. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Have you had a chance to look at what uses remain on the property, since there's a long list of uses that are prohibited? I'm assuming warehouse is left, but are there other uses that are left?
I haven't had a chance to look at it thoroughly.
Okay, thank you. And I'm thinking during our last discussion, there was a promise of a wall, a masonry wall. Is it, because we don't have a site plan or anything, so is there a
So
inclusion?
I don't see it in the deed restrictions.
I don't see it either.
But again, I really just kind of opened it to pull, so it may be in there, and I don't want to misstate, but I didn't see it in there.
Right. I wasn't really expecting answers as much as just to draw attention to the omissions, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one follow-up on that. I think you've touched on a few things that staff thought would potentially improve the offered deed restrictions and make the property potentially more compatible. So we've talked about, I think I heard that a 20-foot landscape buffer might be more appropriate. The prior discussion about a solid masonry wall, the restriction on the door orientation. I also heard you talk about how the truck traffic is being routed on the site. Is that something that in your evaluation might be something for this body to consider if acceptable to the applicant?
Certainly, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Aguirre. Commissioners, we do have the zoning equivalent of a cliffhanger. So stay tuned for the end of the saga potentially here at the hearing. And I will bring my popcorn. Commissioners, it is 12:21. That concludes the briefing of the Dow City Plan Commission. Enjoy your lunch, and we will be back online for the hearing at 1:30 sharp.